Some of these stories might be disturbing to you. If you don't like thinking about dying or what happens after you're dead, you might want to skip this episode. Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff, and Joe the Scientist explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lynn, and...
I'm Joe.
We had a pretty good response off the last podcast format where we played real ghost sighting videos. For those of you who only get audio, then you could have heard the audio, and then we gave our reactions. And because of that, today we're going to watch some videos on near-death experiences, and all of these have audio that's self-explanatory. So a near-death experience is also known as an NDE. I was going to say NDA, which is a non-disclosure agreement. That could be too. It's a profound personal experience that can occur when someone is close to death. Some people say when you have reached clinical death and then you are brought back so you can relate what you experienced. Some of the most common characteristics of NDEs include the sensation of leaving the body, like you're detached from your body, a tunnel or darkness and you're drawn towards a brilliant light at the end of the tunnel, a sense of peace and well-being or unconditional love, a feeling of having access to unlimited knowledge, like everything is clear suddenly, and encounters with deceased loved ones. So you have a feeling of encountering people who have died before you that you loved. I will add to this that it could also be, if you are a religious person, that you see a religious figure. Just saying, because I saw that over and over and over. People who were previously religious in life had a near-death experience and they thought they saw Jesus.
It's not surprising. What if you come at it from the perspective that it's your brain shutting down? Then it's not like that's surprising. Oh, look, this person is hallucinating that they think they see a religious figure.
Okay.
The most relevant figure in this particular time span. But if you approach it from a perspective like, oh, no, it is something really happening, then you have to integrate that somehow with that model. Jesus and Allah and Buddha and all of them
Very
exist.
true. Very true.
But that's just, it becomes harder and harder.
Less common than what I saw. NDEs can also be negative with feelings of like anguish and distress and devastation and seeing hellish imagery. Most of them were not like that I saw.
From what I've heard, it's very uncommon for that. It does happen.
Yeah, it does.
But it's very, very uncommon.
So this has been described since antiquity. As long as people have been recording their experiences, people have been telling about these near-death experiences. It's been attempted to scientifically study near-death experiences, but it's really pretty hard to do. So there are some real challenges. Number one is if somebody dies, if they don't come back, then you don't know what they experienced. It would be very hard to balance taking care of a patient with wanting to study whether or not they had an experience as they were dying, because you want to bring them back, A, because you're taking care of a patient, B, because you want them to relate what they experienced. So I think that it's not a simple thing to study it scientifically. And I wonder at those people who say they're studying it scientifically, if they're really studying it scientifically.
Yeah. Now, one thing that would pretty much be more or less definitive if you think that your brain is storing all of what you're experiencing is you hook them up to a machine that continuously scans their entire brain.
Yeah.
Arbitrarily closely, so you can emulate, you can reconstruct what they're seeing and believe, and then just keep scanning while they're dying.
Well, one of the videos that we're going to watch, not this first one, but the next one, actually addresses some of those things, the chemicals that go through the brain and what people have surmised is going on, but that they cannot prove that that's what's going on. Mm-hmm. I would like to point out that there have been times where they have had people hooked up so they could see there was a complete loss of brain function. Mm-hmm. And yet when they were revived, they related a near-death experience.
Well, so one possibility is that your brain actually comes up with stuff afterward. And that's of all the scenarios where false memories like that could occur.
Good point.
Your brain shutting down is probably one of the most likely.
Good point.
Because all that stuff has to start back up again. Mm-hmm. And it might just infer that something had happened when nothing really had happened.
Right. Okay, so before I play this first video, I want to say that there is a distinction between two types of videos, both of which are commonly tagged as near-death experiences. Mm-hmm. An NDE is when, and which is what we're talking about, is when you experience clinical death, and then when you wake up, you tell of an experience that you had that is not it didn't really happen. It didn't happen, at least as far as anybody observing the person laying there on the table could relate, which goes along with what you're describing, something that's manufactured after the fact. The brain is trying to make sense of what it just went through, and so it just blah, 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 and creates a whole scenario. And I know that happens because I have certainly been sleeping. Somebody knocked at the door, and it wakes me up, and I go and answer the door, and I'll say, "Were you knocking for a while?" Because I will have had an entire dream that incorporated that door knocking, that had to have taken place.
That it might occur. It's like, what's a memory? What's your memory of something having happened? It also includes the stuff that you just believe you know about what happened.
Right.
So at the moment of recall of an aspect of a memory, that aspect might just be constructed during the process of recall.
Right.
So
the other type of near-death experience that you commonly will see in videos, in people's Facebook stories, and TikToks, is where somebody has a close call with death. Mm-hmm. They don't lose consciousness. They may be injured, but they nearly died.
Yeah.
There was one that was really harrowing. This girl was driving through, I think it was Dallas, 85 miles an hour, went to swap lanes. At the same moment, a semi was coming into that lane, and she had to make a split-second decision to try and evade getting hit. And when you're going 85 miles an hour and you turn your wheel even slightly, it makes you lose control. And she spun around, and she saw the guardrail coming at her at one point, and she thought, "This is it, I'm going to die." And all of a sudden, she came out of the spin, and she's facing the right way. And so she continues on her way. And one of the cars that had been near her passed by, and the guy looked at her and like, "What the hell is wrong with you?" And she called that her near-death experience because she felt like she nearly died.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not what we're talking about today. This first one is by a guy named Ash Perrow, and I believe that he wrote a book. Maybe not, but I think
about dying or what?
He wrote a book of this experience.
7 years ago, I had a near-death experience, and I wanted to share one of my biggest learnings from that with you. And so my name's Ash, by the way. And I went in for a back operation, and during the operation the surgeons tore a vein. They didn't realize they'd tore a vein, and they stitched me up, sent me back to the ward. And during the night I had a lot of pain. In the morning the physio came to get me up, and I looked down at my leg, and it was quite swollen. It was at least double the size that it would normally be. And he said, "Oh, you'll be right, up you get." So I stood up, and then within seconds I collapsed, and I had no pulse, I wasn't breathing. The emergency team came in, and I was very aware that, this is quite serious, and I was still awake, and I was thinking, I'll be all right. And then I got to this point, and I realized I wasn't all right. And I heard them saying his blood pressure's on 52 on 36, and I thought, I'm dying. This is dying. And I remember looking around the room, and I saw the physio, who was only a young guy. He was about 23, 24 by the looks of him. And he was so pale and scared. And apologies, I'm going to say a little swear word. And I thought to myself, "You poor bastard. You think you killed me." And then I started to black out. Except the curious thing was that instead of just blacking out, like fainting and you have nothing, and then you wake up and you're like, "Oh, what happened?" I actually had conscious awareness throughout, and I was surprised by this. So I had enough conscious awareness to go, hang on a second, I blacked out and I can still think. And my experience was that I had become ripples, and I was heading out like ripples in all directions. It was infinite. I was infinite. And I just kept going and going and going. And I was thinking, wow, this is dying. And I'm still me. I had this sense of this essence of me, which was very curious because I always thought that I would die and become some sort of enlightened Buddha being or something like that. But I was me. And so one of the lessons, which isn't the key lesson I'm getting to, was even when we die, we are still ourselves. And so that was my experience there, and continued to expand in these ripples. And I started to say, I want to stay. And I was going through all these people I want to stay for. So my partner at the time, children, we had a blended family, and I was saying I want to stay for them, my daughter. And I was still the ripples, and I thought, I'm still dying. And then this warmth came over me, and I said, I want to stay for the work that I do and walk the planet from my heart. And the instant I expressed that, came straight back into my body, opened my eyes, they had a pulse, I started breathing, and I was back to immense pain, ridiculous amounts of pain, I have to say. And previous to that, I had no pain. So I had conscious awareness and no pain, and then I came back in, opened my eyes, started breathing, and had immense pain. And I would question, did I really go through this experience? Was this true? Maybe I just fainted. And so many of the things I've shared with you, I've had to process. But the hardest thing for me, and of course, sometimes the hardest things lead to the most profound lessons. The hardest thing for me was that I was in a room dying and nobody I loved was there. It took me months to be able to say that without crying. I actually had to have therapy so I could process that I died alone in a room of strangers. So the lesson from that was, I want my life to be full of so much connection and love and passion and beauty. So for example, where I am right now, it's just stunning, right? I want my life to be full of that because one day I'm going to die. And I could die alone. Well, actually, one day I'm going to die again. It's a definite. And I could be alone, or I could be surrounded by loved ones. But in the meantime, I'm going to nourish myself with that love and that connection and the love and connection to myself and to the planet, so that when I do die, I can be totally accepting and surrender to it. Go, even if I die alone, I can go, what a beautiful gift this has been. And this time I can die content rather than die with immense sadness. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Please feel free to follow, like, or share. And by doing so, you hack your algorithm, meaning that you might get more videos from me or people who talk about similar things. So sending my love, picturing you being happy and joyful and thriving wherever you are.
First of all, I was wrong. He did not write a book. He is a musician, and now he's a personal lifestyle coach.
Oh, okay. So it'd be really interesting to see, like, what the near-death experiences of people who had absolutely no idea they were even dead. Like they just keeled over immediately. No awareness possible. What could even be happening, and then they're revived. Because if you go through a process of I'm okay, and then, I'm in a hospital or whatever, and then, oh, look, I'm fainting, and they're saying, yeah, he's going to die. You are very much anchored to the idea
right.
that Right. So your brain can start constructing a narrative, like regardless what actually really happens or what you really experience at that point, typically, you can construct a narrative. Like, for instance, let's say there really is like a spirit realm, and you do experience that when you get close enough to,
Mm-hmm.
But most people, like all of these, are just not there yet. And it's all constructed, Even in the case where there really is something supernatural there, this could all still be constructed.
That's true.
So the best cases would be if you could eliminate that they're biased by the idea of what should be happening,
Mm-hmm.
So that case really typical, I think.
I think
experience some kind of transcendent experience with strong emotions, changes how they
and then it
see
changed
life.
his perspective of his life.
Yeah.
One of the videos I watched, which I didn't include because it only lasted for like 10 seconds, was an anesthesiologist saying near-death experiences happen every single day. The backdrop was an operating room, which I think was a green screen, but regardless, the imagery is implying near-death experiences happen every single day in operating rooms just like this all over the country. And he said, and people don't remember it because we give them amnesiac drugs to make them forget everything that's going on, which is true, they do, because they don't want you to have any memory of, as I did, waking up during surgery, or, have the ghostly memories of people speaking about you and you're unable to communicate with them or whatever those things are. So they give you a drug that makes you have complete and total amnesia about what you experienced. So that could answer one of those things like, why wouldn't more people express that they had these experiences just out of the blue, not expecting that they're having an experience?
Yeah.
So that could explain that. Don't know, but it could. Okay, the next video is, it's by a lady named Mel Z. And unfortunately, she rattled off so many facts and numbers and things that my sense, and I didn't fact check any of it, my sense is that it's kind of like when a politician gets up and says, we've got 75% this and blah, blah, blah. And it's just kind of like to dazzle you with all these numbers so you assume that this is all true. I don't know. But, and it'll be interesting to hear what you think when you hear her talk. She talks very fast, if I recall it correctly. Well, how do I get back to it? To the whole list?
You go back. You click back.
I'm clicking back. Oh, there. Okay, Mel Z.
If the thought of your own death isn't horrifying enough, consider that scientists are now saying that you actually will be aware that you're dead for up to 20 seconds. For several decades, scientists have been studying people who claim to have near-death experiences. Whether you believe them or not, they're studying them and finding out more about what actually happens in the brain as death takes over. Approximately 5% of dying patients and 10% of cardiac arrest patients describe having near-death experiences where they float above their bodies, they see a white light, they travel through a tunnel, they see lost loved ones. Some people say that this proves that there is an afterlife, and other people say that it proves that there's something neurological going on. So scientists have been studying rats. They stopped their hearts and checked their brain waves and found that their brain was flooded with a ton of electrical current. Some people think that that explains the white light and the tunnel and the falling and the sort of psychedelic experiences that happen to people, but there is no proof because obviously we don't know what a rat is seeing in their mind. Having a near-death experience is there's a chemical reaction going on in your brain. Some people have attributed it to what they call DMT. There is no proof that the levels of DMT in your brain actually increase at the point of death. But they have done research comparing the experiences of people who've had near-death experiences and people who've had psychedelic trips on ketamine or on DMT, and they find that they are quite similar, and the word that people most often use to describe these things is reality, which is interesting. What we do know is that at the point of death, there's a huge surge of neural activity in your brain. Whether or not we know that we're dead is not 100% certain, but there are many people who have had near-death experiences and have heard their own death announced by a surgeon or by a family member, which is pretty fucking wild and I think absolutely terrifying.
The figures that she rattled off seem right, seem what I've seen.
So there's, while I was listening to this, it reminded me that my sister said that when she had surgery, and she has had several surgeries in her life, that as she's going under, because they give you a drug to relax you, and then they also give you a drug that paralyzes you. So it's probably the drug that relaxes you and makes you go unconscious. She says that it's winding down noise and a light and a tunnel and the whole thing. So that's interesting.
The relaxant?
What she experiences when they're putting her under.
Oh.
So I have not had that experience when I've only been put under once, and I did not have that experience, but then it wasn't successful and I woke up. So I don't know. I don't know if what Mel Z just spouted off, I don't know if any of that's accurate or not. But it didn't seem like it was necessarily inaccurate, but there was a lot of information there. Actually, do you know what DMT is?
Dimethyltryptamine or something like that.
So it's a drug that people abuse.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Yeah. That was interesting in that she's talking about how people using these drugs experience similar experiences. I don't know. I think that might have something to do with it. One thing I will dispute is her saying it's 30 seconds or 20 seconds after you die, you still have consciousness.
One of her, it's like 5 minutes.
I thought it was like 5 minutes.
That does bring up an interesting question, though. So think of this. Your consciousness, whatever it is very, very, very heavily tied to your memory and the physical processes that we can measure in your brain. But if those physical processes are not present anymore, then what? Like, assuming there is some kind of just the minimal supernatural thing that's called a consciousness. No other supernatural stuff required, no souls, no whatever, just consciousness. Whatever the hell that is, it can attach to the physical processes in your brain. So physical processes in your brain are tied to, are required for your memory, for cognition, for recognition what's going on, everything. But then you have this consciousness thing. So either it detaches once your physical processes in your brain are shut down, or it continues essentially observing those processes. But the processes do crazy things, after that point. They're no longer function as they have been. There's of course a third one that's like idealism is true in the whole. It's just all a theater. The consciousness thing, the physical process thing, it's all just one process going on. And at that point, just any other thing could happen. I mean, anything could happen.
That is true. Okay, this last video is a guy named Robert Greene, and he was on Andrew Huberman's podcast, and I have a great amount of respect for Andrew Huberman, Dr. Andrew Huberman. So anyway, this guy, Robert Greene, is telling what he experienced during a stroke.
And in the process of dying, strange things happen to the brain, right? So particularly with a stroke or something like that, where blood stops flowing to oxygen stops flowing to your brain, you have kind of visions and things that you might think are hallucinations, but that later seem like actually you are actually glimpsing the reality as opposed to the illusion that the brain creates. Images come into your brain and they're not organized in any way, and the brain organizes in a way that you can understand it. Well, when you're dying, all of that scrambles up and you actually are seeing something else. The other feeling I had was life, when I was having the stroke, was life draining out of me and my bones getting softer and softer and softer. And I can't really logically explain that, the feeling of bones softening up and dissolving. But for weeks and months afterwards, I could access that feeling of my bones dissolving, etc. It was a feeling of all your energy draining out of you and you're dying, literally.
So a really important concept is, I think I described this the other day. Imagine you have an entirely, really, truly physical universe, no supernatural anything. It's just how hardline physicists would model our universe. And an entity with no soul, obviously, or anything, no consciousness, anything. It's a philosophical zombie. It has no consciousness. Okay. It's a person, but it has no, And they would say the exact same things that a person in, real reality might say. And a really important concept is the feelings that you have about reality and everything also are coming from your brain. So if you have this strange, very convincing sense of something, that's completely, that's not like not explainable by just regular brain functioning in physicalism. There's nothing stopping us from just saying, yeah, it's just your brain making that up, you know, or inferring that or whatever. The implication is that you have this very profound, very convincing sense or feeling of something, and that means that it is something more than just what you typically experience. But that does not have to be the case. Now, of course, caveat is it could be the other way around too. Maybe you are experiencing, maybe those feelings are the things making it through to your sense of physical reality. Again, it's like, you know, I've described this before. There's like a firewall where, you know, we can perform science and everything on one side. On the other side, we can't get any information.
Yeah.
But we can infer there's something there at a meta level. So like, you know, there's a consciousness because you have information in your brain and then your brain shuts down, but you are the information. So what happens to the information? We know that the information, that process, it still continues in a sense. So there's information being encoded in the process. And that's valid even in physicalism. Literally, the information that is in your brain, your whatever, the process changes dramatically. The information continues to evolve. So 100%, the information that constitutes you and your experience continues after your brain radically changes.
And when you say radically changes,
I mean,
you're talking about dies.
Like neurons don't function the way they do, and then they dissolve. So essentially, all the orderly processes in your neurology become extremely diffuse, are connecting with like thermodynamically, in the thermodynamic regime, they're interacting with like all the stuff around you, you know. Nothing that was typically how it worked before is how it works now. And again, this is all valid in physicalism. It's guaranteed true. But it's like, okay, you're born into the world. You don't know what the hell's going on, right?
Yeah,
you never know what's going on. Like, the universe could have been created just before you were born.
That's true.
You still don't know what's going on. If you knew what you would experience after death, you still don't know what's going on anyway. You know?
Yeah.
So one thing to take away from that, though, is if you focus on just like living your life, you won't be necessarily afraid of that. You know? Like, for instance, imagine you're on death's door, but you have this crossword puzzle in front of you, and man, you're really, really absorbed in this crossword puzzle. And then you die. And at no point were you like thinking about dying. You were really absorbed in this crossword puzzle.
That is true. And I think that's one thing, one takeaway from almost all of the people who get to that point of the aftermath of how their lives were impacted from these experiences, is that they come up with some version of just living life to enjoy it and just living life to make connections and you know, feel connected to other people or other experiences. And so that is true. And that is one thing we should all take away from it. I don't know that any of these would convince me in that near-death experiences were true, because I think your arguments were really, really valid. That's not to say I don't believe that there's something that persists after physical death, but nothing really did that for me.
So, you know, as usual, I'll say how I look at these kind of things, evidence and whatever, is evidence is anything that narrows the set of possibilities down. Does any one of these, what they say, narrow it down at all?
No.
Well, it narrows it down from like the universe where somebody can't experience, apparently experience something, quote unquote, after their brain shuts down. But that's not it. In that same set of explanations is like, well, their brain is just shutting down. You know, it's just, that's how it happens typically. And also is that there's a supernatural realm and your soul exits your body and blah, 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 you know? So though that really doesn't cut it down very much, it still is very, very weak evidence for that your soul or consciousness or whatever persists after death in a structured, orderly form. But yeah, it's not. I mean, what really good evidence would be like is like, you know, the person they are on the operating table and they flatline. 2 minutes go by as they're trying to revive them. They do a brain scan, zero activity. And in the next room over, there's like something specific happening, like on a TV screen. There's a particular event, and then someone responds in a particular way. The person gets revived, and later on they say, "Yes, I was hovering above in this other room and saw these two events happening, and there was no sound or something."
That actually might not be an argument for spiritual life after physical death. It might actually be an argument for some kind of psychic phenomenon.
Yeah, again. So like, you really just want to narrow it down to, is there a supernatural phenomenon going on? So, the reason is because if you can narrow it down to anything outside of normal physicalism that's modeled by hardline physicists, anything outside of that, if you can prove absolutely anything outside of that, or if you can provide strong evidence for anything outside of that, then all the other ones also are more likely. Because you should always rate things you have experience with more likely. You have one experience that you're guaranteed is like supernatural, like a psychic phenomenon, then the other ones now you have a little bit more experience in. The whole category.
Yeah.
If somebody died and they, in that moment, like they have no soul or anything, but in that moment they have a psychic connection with something else, you know, it's like probably more likely that they do have a soul and also they have a psychic connection with somebody else.
Okay, so yeah, but another thing occurs to me as you're saying this, that if brain death was a chemical process and that these hallucinations occur as a byproduct of that chemical process in your brain or physical process in your brain, then people who are in comas, who are proven to have no brain activity, when they wake up, they're recounting things that really happened. They're recounting what went on around them. They will tell you, yeah, I heard people come in the room and say this.
Yeah, so, and that's what, as far as I understand, that's what near-death experience, like researchers try to find. They try to find, like the experiments, I guess you'd call them experiments, where they put something on top of a dresser or something so that they can't see it. But then when people have a near-death experience in that room, then they might float above their body and they might see it. And that is then like, you know, and then they record it. And if anyone experiences that, they see it where they wouldn't be able to normally.
For all we know, every hospital in the country has got some weird thing on top of a cabinet that they all are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So that they can, you know, it's like they're controlled.
And maybe, you know, the old timers, some of their patients have said, yeah, what was that weird thing when I was floating above my body? You know, and they just never reported it.
Right.
It's possible.
So everyone knows, if they've listened to this podcast at all, that I believe that some aspect of who and what you are survives your physical death. I just absolutely believe that. And some people call that your soul. Don't know what I'm going to call it. But I have been fascinated by the subject for over 50 years. So if people are interested in this and we get any kind of feedback on this, I want to do more of these because I think they're really, really interesting. And I think it's interesting to hear your perspective because that's something I had not thought of, the creating a memory after the fact. I had not thought about that.
Yeah, and actually I should say that sort of thing can happen in various different ways. So like you could have an experience and not remember it at all. Like you could go to fucking Nirvana and talk to Jesus and Buddha and whatever, and then come back and it just, boom, all gone. You could also have a memory, not necessarily what you call a memory, but like a memory that's primed to go. That when you then go
Oh, yeah.
over, it then triggers it and acts like a memory now.
Right.
You know, so it's
Yeah.
like
And
there's
certainly,
all sorts of ways.
certainly
you
a
can go.
lifetime of being indoctrinated in a religious belief system or whatever those things are would
Yeah,
would prime you.
exactly.
Truly Terrified is a Salt of the Earth production. Tell us your story and send us your comments. You can send us a 3-minute voicemail at 715-575-9420 or text us at that same number. You can also email us at lynnandjoeonthego@gmail.com or contact us through Reddit. Our contact information is also in the show notes. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.
You can't get back into your body.
Ah!